Hey everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and I hope you're doing well today. I have here another random movie review of a film that I recently checked out from my local library. I've set a challenge for myself to go to my local library at least once or twice a month and pick out 3 movies each time of films that I've never seen before, and I want to watch and review them on my various channels, depending on my mood. And this one, I was kind of in between on going with the review on this channel or my Goosebumps Completionist channel, but I settled here because while this movie is a PG horror movie, it's definitely before PG-13 became a thing. And if that was a thing, this probably would have been that. Maybe even possibly R, because this has some gore to it. For a Disney movie, yes, we're talking about a movie released by Walt Disney Pictures in 1983. It was written by Ray Bradbury, who also wrote the book that the movie is based on. And it's directed by Jack Clayton and another uncredited director who did reshoots. And the film in question is Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked, This Way Comes. This was the first time I've ever seen this movie. I just watched it right before I made this review. And I lament never setting the time to watch this, because if you don't know anything about me, I love late 70s and early to mid 80s, like 78 to 1985 horror movies, especially with good cameras involved with those movies. There's something about them that just stick out of my brain that just imbues classic cinema. And this movie shocked me by how well it was made and how much I loved this thing. Now, with that being said, I did not know the production issues about the movie before I watched it. But after I watched it, I looked into the history of it, and I was just really fascinated by it. So this movie came out in 1983. It was one of Disney's first live-action horror attempts. I know they tried, I think, The Race to Witch Mountain. They did The Watcher in the Woods. And they did this movie in the 1980s. They were starting to kind of branch out of the Disney name a little bit and possibly lay the groundwork what would later become Touchstone. But at this point in time, Ray Bradbury, he was kind of up there in age. He was trying to get, I guess, more of his stories out there. I mean, if you don't know who Ray Bradbury is, he wrote Fahrenheit 451. That's probably his most famous novel of all time. He was a prolific writer that throughout time, especially in the 1950s, EC Comics, the people behind Tales from the Crypt and such, they took some of his stories and put them in the comics because of how just great they were. In the 1980s, this was kind of like a resurgence of Ray Bradbury coming out. I mean, he had his own anthology show, and then he had this movie come out based on one of his more popular books as well. Maybe not as popular as Fahrenheit 451, but still well known. Well, so the story goes, the director, Jack Clayton, he got the script, they made the movie, there's a director's cut supposedly out there, and Disney supposedly hated it. The way it was edited, the music to it, did not like how maybe mature it was. So what they did was, they removed Jack Clayton, they removed the editor, and the original sound score person, and they went back and spent an additional $4 million on top of their original $16 million budget to basically reshoot a bunch of scenes of the movie. They had an uncredited director come in and whatnot. Supposedly there was drama behind the scenes as well, because Jack Clayton was pissed off that Ray Bradbury didn't give him credit for helping him write the script for the film. So the story goes, I don't know. But nonetheless, this film had a $20 million budget, all said and done, on its release, and it only made back like $8 million and some change. So it did not make a profit. So some people might attribute this to maybe Disney was at the wrong place at the wrong time trying these movies out. Maybe they just put more money into it than they should have. And some people seem to think that the movie bombed because, it doesn't fit Disney's IP. And I have to say, I kind of agree with the latter. This does not fit with Disney, and I can see why maybe some people were apprehensive in going to see this. But this movie's a hidden gem, especially for early 80s horror. For a PG horror movie, this was surprisingly gory. It was filled with atmosphere. There's so many things about this movie that's just electric. So off the bat, if I had to recommend this movie to you, go check this out if you haven't seen this before. It might hit you different, it might not, but I thoroughly enjoyed this film from start to finish. There's just something about it that's electric, and yeah, loved it. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the story is about these two boys, Jim and Will, and they live in this small town in Illinois. I think it's called Greentown. And the time period that the story takes place in, I believe, is the 1920s or maybe 30s. It's around that time. You know, they still had rotary phones, the old school ones that stood up, and they had to put the thing on top of the phone and, you know, do the dial. It's set in that time. In the town one day, everything seems to be normal. It's set in October, and this man going around is kind of saying a storm is coming and evil's coming. You need to buy a lightning rod to protect you, and trying to sell these lightning rods out to the townsfolk. And these two boys hear that the guy's selling lightning rods. So one of the boys, Jim, goes home and takes money from his mother's savings because I guess his mother is a single mom. And he gives the money to the man to get a lightning rod, which is supposed to save him from this evil. And the other boy, Will, his father is rather old and much older than your average dad for a younger kid. This kid's probably like 10 or 11 years old. And his dad is easily in his like 50s or 60s. And he runs the town's library, which I think is a little bit different from the book counterpart, but that's not the point here. He is much interested in the town's history and doesn't really spend much time with his son because he feels too old for him, and also because he's kind of a socialite. Well, after they're visited by this old man, this traveling carnival called the Dark's Pandemonium Carnival comes into town, and the townsfolk seem to be very embracive towards this traveling carnival coming in. And these boys, of course, are very enamored by a carnival coming to town because where they live, it's kind of small and isolated. I mean, you look at the first shot of the movie, there is a Great Plains looking thing with nothing out there. And then you drive randomly into this town where everything's on like one street kind of thing. So they're happy the carnival's in town. And once they start perusing the area, they notice some weird things going on. And off the bat, there's a man who runs a bar in town who is an amputee. He's lost his arm and his leg. He walks into this area known as the Mirror Maze, and he seems to disappear within it with a bright flashlight. And these boys can't help but think about the prophet of sorts selling the lightning rods earlier, that maybe this carnival might be evil and they should stay around because there's some rides that look like they aren't open, and maybe they can try them out and get into mischief because they kind of lack parental figures kind of monitoring them, so they feel like they can do these things. So they hang out one night, but in doing so, they end up uncovering something very sinister, or something that might be sinister. They see one of these carnival hands that operate, I think, the hammer to the bell attraction. He gets on this carousel that these boys were trying to sneak into, and while he's on the carousel, he is pretty much sent rotating backwards, and let's just say something happens, right? Where the guy on the carousel might start to de-age a little bit. But before that, I think they were caught by the guy who runs it, named Mr. Dark. And Mr. Dark kind of shows them his tattoos and says, hey, you shouldn't be in there. You shouldn't be in here. You boys are, getting into trouble. I would stay away if I were you. Well, the boys can't resist temptation. They go back again. That's when they see that event. And then they see the boy wander off, and they decide to chase him and see where he's trying to go. He ends up at this old lady's house, and this old lady was also at the carnival earlier, and she went inside the mirror maze herself and came out looking normal, as she usually does, but she seems to be kind of dismissive that this random boy is like her long-lost nephew. So Will and Jim, they go inside the house to make sure she's okay, but the boy is like really creepy and silent and won't talk to them. and they're trying to just make sure that she's okay, and they try to leave. But the boy follows them out, throws a rock through the window, and frames him by running him away. And the woman wants to get these boys into trouble. So the kids scamper off. They realize that something really odd is going on with this carnival, and this guy was probably right that it's all evil. And they start to become more observant to what the carnival has done to the people around their town. And for the rest of the movie, it's essentially about Jim and Will. They have their own personal issues at home. Like Jim, he has a single mom with, his dad being dead and all that. So his mom is constantly like asking him to make his own food and stuff. So he doesn't really feel like he has much going for him. So the carnival seems to appeal more to him than Will. While Will, he's a kid that wishes he was close to his dad, but his dad's always busy with the library, and he's a big cigar smoker and doesn't like to do things with them because he feels too old. So these boys kind of confide in each other, and Will was kind of the voice of reason in the duo, saying that, no, these things that are happening are bad. And for the rest of the movie, they get they have these various interactions with locals, and we see these locals in their own little scenes kind of become part of the carnival itself. And we see Mr. Dark is kind of collecting the souls of these people, and it's implied that he's convincing them to give away their souls and essentially die to join this immortal carnival. And as the story goes along, the boys try to save their parents, and they end up breaking through to Will's father when the carnival decides to make a parade through town. And the dad seems to know what's going on, and the boys are like the voice of reason with him, not to listen to the temptations that Mr. Dark can give, because throughout the movie we do see Mr. Dark trying to persuade people to do things because he has these magic abilities. It can grant them everything they want by giving them the illusion that joining the carnival and siding with him will bring them those things. But there's a big revelation after the parade is gone through and the boys are hiding out from Mr. Dark, who's pretty much relentlessly looking for them. And there's a whole scene. There's a scene where the boys are spying and they see a vision of a decapitated head with like blood on it of Will. That was insane. And then there's a scene where Mr. Dark is talking to Will's dad while they're hiding and like observing the conversation, and he's squeezing his hand and blood just trickling out and dripping on Will's face. What the hell, Disney? But that was really cool. But it builds up to this library scene where the dad is sharing with the boys the history of the town, and he's showing his own father's memoirs, who used to be like a preacher and one of the founders of Greentown itself. And he's saying that this carnival goes back all the way to the time when he started the town, and he used to come by a lot more back in the day. But there's something implying that because when the carnival came, it took so many younger souls, it took a while for younger souls to come back. And kind of what it's also doing at the same time is that it looks at older souls and convinces them to de-age essentially and join the carnival forever. So the whole thing is predicated on youth, and how that ties into the carnival itself is maybe the power that drives the evil of Mr. Dark, who is kind of theorized in the story to be maybe like an acolyte of the devil and doing the devil's work. He's a supernatural entity. But they do realize, after reading the memoirs, that the lightning storm that the crazy guy from earlier was prophesizing could be the answer to how to rid this carnival when it comes to town. So they're holding out hope for that. But Mr. Dark makes his appearance to the library and pretty much interrogates the dad and tries to convince him by ripping up his father's memoirs and trying to de-age him. But when that doesn't work, he gives them a taste of death and pretty much leaves them defenseless. And he goes after the young boys, and he ends up taking them into his carnival reluctantly. And now he's going to use his rides to make them a part of the carnival forever. But luckily, the dad, came to his senses, realized the error of his ways, and he realized that he needs to come around for his son and his friend. and do the fatherly thing. And it may or may not shake out where Will is able to escape, let's just say, the mirror maze, and Jim is able to not have to go on that crazy carousel. And let's just say the lightning storm may or may not come to fruition. We get to see what happens to Mr. Dark and the rest of the carnival. And the story kind of wraps up right after the climax. It's pretty short and sweet after that. So, that in a nutshell is Ray Bradbury, Something Wicked This Way Comes. Honestly, y'all, this movie is one of my favorite older movies that I've come across in recent years. For a 96-minute movie, the same length as a movie that I just watched and reviewed, come play. The same exact, runtime here. This movie was a breeze to watch. From start to finish, you get introduced to the main characters of Jim and Will. You get to understand their characters rather simply early on, and it develops into something a little more deeper. And then the story has its thematic messages tied with their characters about them, kind of confiding in each other and realizing that everybody around them, the adults around them essentially kind of envy being young, and they see the carnival as a ticket out of dying, essentially, in an isolated place where they can just travel along the world, while the kids, you would think that would be their dream. They're put into the hero's perspective, and they have to save the town because they know it's wrong and it's evil. And without their characters, especially the dad character in the story, would not have been the same. It's just a really well told story, and it's simple enough to follow, even though it can be kind of confusing and weird. It's very effective for a horror film, especially from this time. So the characters were really well done. The guy who plays Mr. Dark in this movie, forgive me, I don't know his exact name. It could be, is it Terrence Stamp? It kind of looks like him, like a younger version. I'm not too sure, though. I'm not going to claim who this person is, but whoever plays Mr. Dark did a fantastic job. I mean, his character was super uneasy, and it just made it really easy to just kind of fall in love with him as a character, even though he's outright evil. There's something about him. He's conniving, he's methodical, he's mind-gamey, and he has these supernatural abilities that seem kind of endless, and it all kind of fits in the context of the story, where the carnival itself is a place of wonderment, and Mr. Dark is a source of the wonderment and the temptation that the kids kind of have to overlook. Great characters, and that goes to the side carnival freaks in the story as well. Pam Grier, who's a legendary actor from the 70s and 80s, she plays I think a witch character in this movie. She's really creepy. I think it's called the Dust Witch. Awesome stuff. The guy who played the carnival attraction person who got turned into a kid, that guy and the kid actor deserved a lot of credit here, because every scene they were in, they were creepy because they just didn't talk, and it was just so bizarre, but it worked in that way. Even the parent characters, like the dad of Will, was really well done here. The gore and practical effects, holy shit. For a Disney movie, there's a whole scene near the end, I don't want to spoil it, to a certain character that is fucked up, and it looks really good. Holy shit. The decapitated head of Will, like I brought up, that was really fun to see. The blood trickling out of Mr. Dark's hand and falling onto Will's face, that was insane. For a Disney movie, my hat goes off to you, Jack Clayton, and Ghost director here. That was crazy. I don't know what was reshot and what was kept from the original cut, but holy fuck, man. Great stuff. The atmosphere in this movie, whether we're talking about just the small town feel, or how it genuinely feels like the time period it's set in, or how the carnival setting just kind of just brings this life to the movie, and the rides themselves. It's fantastic. It's absolutely great. The concept of it pretty much being surrounded by this supernatural carnival really does execute well. And the production team in Disney deserve a lot of credit for that $20 million budget they put into this. It feels like they put some heart and soul and some genuine budget into it. So it clearly shows. And that goes into the costumes and the wardrobes as well. The music, I've never heard this music in anything other than Disney. While it might sound like generic Disney music to you, there is some whimsicalness to it. It does feel like Midwest music and like that family movie way, but there's also like a spooky undertone to it that really carried through this movie. It just really works in that regard. And yeah, I mean, it's just addicting to watch all the way through, all the way through the events of the characters and you know, the fight points of the movie and the realization points. All of it is intriguing. My only real issue with this film, honestly, is the ending itself. And, you know, mostly to do with the climax. The climax is a bit rushed compared to the rest of the movie. And the climax is pretty much when the dad has to go rescue the kids. I feel like that point of the movie kind of took its time getting to that point, I will say. And some people might see that as a detraction point, but I don't have a problem with it. But getting up to that point, I feel like in terms of how the climax matters to the runtime of the film, it's relatively short. Like, the way Will gets saved, pretty short. The way Jim gets saved, pretty short. Even how and what happens to Mr. Dark is handled rather short. But I will say, with that aside, I think this film was flawless. I wish there was more to the climax. I wish we got more, I guess, rides involved and some more intrigue with the dad character. And also dealing with the climax, you know, I feel like they could have done a little more explanation on certain things that the dad comes to with Will, but that's nothing I'm going to deduct on, especially when we're referring to Jim and what happens to Jim. But yeah, this movie was fantastic. It's almost a perfect movie in my opinion. It's just an endlessly rewatchable classic, and I can't believe it took me this long to find it. I'm definitely going to pay whatever money it costs to get a copy of a Blu-ray of this. I know it was a Disney Movie Club exclusive, and it's super expensive nowadays. I'm going to go pick this up for my physical collection. I don't care how much it costs. I want a copy, and I'm going to watch it every year around Halloween or in October, along with those other classic 80s and late 70s movies that I watch, like the John Carpenter Halloween movies, like his 1 and 2, and then Halloween 3, Christine, Fright Night. This is going in there. I love this thing. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I'd probably give this movie maybe like a 4.75 out of 5 stars. But I can honestly see myself maybe next year, if I rewatch it, or later this year, rewatching it and saying that I just think it's perfect and forgiving it. So honestly, you can kind of treat this like a provisional 5 out of 5 stars even as well, because even that negative about the climax being rushed is something that I could probably forgive in the future. So it's somewhere in that range. I had a blast with this. You need to go check this movie out if you haven't seen it before. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes, the film, not the book. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this movie before. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.